The massive Zelthari warships appeared in orbit around New Terra without warning. Their hulls gleamed with a dark metallic sheen that absorbed light rather than reflected it. On the bridge of the command vessel, Commander Vex Thor studied the human colony below with cold calculation. This would be conquest number 48 for the Zelthari Empire, and he expected it to proceed exactly like the previous 47. Vex Thor had spent weeks reviewing human military capabilities. The intercepted transmissions showed armies that marched in formation, tanks that rolled across battlefields, and aircraft that engaged in open combat. Primitive by Zelthari standards, but conventional, predictable, easy to counter with superior technology and disciplined troops. He opened a communication channel to the colony below. His translator device converted his clicking speech into human language. The message was simple, and had worked on every other species the Zelthari had encountered. Surrender within 48 hours, or face complete military occupation. Resist and face destruction. The response came within 6 hours. The colonial governor, a nervous man named Peter Hall, agreed to all terms. The surrender document was transmitted, signed, and verified. Vex Thor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another world added to the empire, without firing a single shot. He ordered 3,000 shock troops to the surface. They landed in the capital city, establishing garrison posts at key locations. The Zelthari soldiers wore armor that could deflect most projectile weapons. Their plasma rifles could cut through concrete and steel. Energy shields protected their command posts. By every measure, they were an unstoppable occupation force. The human population seemed cooperative. They stayed in their homes. They avoided the Zelthari patrols. Governor Hall appeared on local broadcasts, urging calm and compliance. Everything proceeded according to standard occupation protocol. Then, on the third night, something changed. Patrol Unit 7 failed to report in at their scheduled time. Vex Thor initially dismissed it as a communication error. Then, Patrol Unit 3 went silent. Then the garrison at the northern checkpoint stopped responding. By dawn, Vex Thor had lost contact with 18 separate units, comprising over 400 soldiers. He ordered aerial reconnaissance. The drones found empty posts and abandoned equipment. No bodies. No signs of battle. Just vacant positions and disabled communication arrays. The remaining troops reported hearing nothing, seeing nothing. Their comrades had simply vanished. A single message began playing on repeat across all Zelthari frequencies. The voice spoke in broken, poorly pronounced Zelthari, but the words were clear enough. Leave now. This is your only warning. Vex Thor felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. In 47 conquests, he had never encountered this. Resistance usually meant open battle. It meant explosions and casualties and clear enemies to target. This was different. This was invisible. 20 kilometers outside the city, Captain Jake Morrison lowered his binoculars and allowed himself a thin smile. The Zelthari commander had taken the bait perfectly. Jake's team, officially designated Special Operations Unit 12 but known among themselves as Ghost Unit, had spent the past 72 hours proving a simple point. Technology meant nothing if you couldn't find your enemy. Jake was 34 years old and had spent half his life training for exactly this kind of operation. His face was unremarkable, the kind that disappeared in a crowd. That was intentional. Special Forces operators didn't look like action heroes. They looked like anyone else, which made them perfect for blending in. His team consisted of 12 specialists, each trained in unconventional warfare. Sergeant Lisa Chen handled demolitions and could build an explosive device from household materials. Corporal Danny Price was their electronic warfare expert, capable of hacking alien technology with improvised equipment. Lieutenant Ben Hayes managed reconnaissance and could move through hostile territory without leaving a trace. They hadn't killed the missing Zelthari soldiers. They had captured them, using tranquilizer compounds developed specifically for alien biology. The prisoners were secured in an underground facility, alive but unconscious. Jake's orders had been clear. Make them afraid, but avoid casualties if possible. Dead soldiers created martyrs. Missing soldiers created terror. The Zelthari don't understand what they're dealing with, Jake thought as he watched the alien aircraft crisscross the sky, searching desperately for traces of his team. They think war is about technology and firepower. They've never faced an enemy that refuses to fight fair. Vex Thor stood in his command center, studying tactical displays that told him nothing useful. His military education had prepared him for fleet combat and ground assaults. It had taught him how to coordinate thousands of troops across multiple battlefronts. It had not taught him how to fight an enemy he couldn't see. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Krevnal, suggested withdrawing. Vex Thor rejected the idea immediately. The Zelthari Empire did not retreat from inferior species. That would set a dangerous precedent. Other conquered worlds might think resistance was possible. Instead, he ordered a second wave. 5,000 troops this time. With heavy armor support. He implemented counterinsurgency protocols from the military database. Aerial surveillance would run continuously. Patrols would follow unpredictable patterns. Checkpoints would be fortified and heavily guarded. Every rule in the manual would be followed precisely. Jake received updates on the incoming troops from Danny, who had infiltrated the Zelthari communication network using captured equipment. The aliens were broadcasting in the clear, confident that humans lacked the technology to intercept their signals. They were wrong. Ghost units split into 4 teams. Lisa took the demolition specialists to prepare surprises along the main supply routes. Danny continued his electronic surveillance, mapping every Zelthari communication relay. Ben's reconnaissance team began tracking the new patrol patterns. Jake coordinated everything from their hidden base, a series of tunnels beneath an abandoned factory. The second wave landed with overwhelming force. Zelthari armor rolled through the streets. Soldiers established checkpoints every 3 blocks. Aircraft maintained constant overwatch. By any conventional measure, the occupation was now impossible to resist. Ghost Unit waited 3 days, studying the patterns. The Zelthari followed their protocols religiously, which made them predictable. On the 4th night, Lisa's team struck first. A supply convoy heading toward the main garrison exploded spectacularly. The bombs were crude by military standards, built from fertilizer and fuel, but they were invisible to Zelthari sensors designed to detect sophisticated weapons. Over the next 2 weeks, Vex Thor watched his second invasion force disintegrate, not through direct combat, but through 1,000 small cuts. Convoys exploded, patrols disappeared, equipment malfunctioned mysteriously. His soldiers reported seeing humans everywhere. News of the New Terra disaster spread through the Zelthari military like poison through water. Commander Vex Thor's report sat in a classified database, accessible only to senior officers. Most dismissed it as the excuses of a failed commander. A few read it carefully and felt a cold weight settle in their stomachs. Those few began asking questions about human military capabilities that went beyond intercepted battle footage. 3 months after New Terra, the Zelthari attempted another colony conquest. This time they chose Meridian Station, a mining outpost with a population of 15,000 humans. General Thexval commanded the operation. He had read Vex Thor's report and dismissed most of it as paranoid delusion. Invisible enemies that struck without warning? Psychological warfare that broke disciplined troops? It sounded like fantasy. Thexval brought 8,000 soldiers and enough firepower to level the entire colony if necessary. He would not repeat Vex Thor's mistakes. His troops landed in force, established a secure perimeter, and began occupation procedures with overwhelming military presence. Ghost Unit wasn't at Meridian Station, but Phantom Team was. Phantom Team operated under Captain Alan Cruz, a special forces operator with 12 years of experience. His team consisted of 10 specialists who had trained alongside Ghost Unit at the same facilities. They used the same tactics, the same philosophy, the same understanding of how to fight an enemy that thought technology made them invincible. The Zelthari learned the same lessons Vex-Thor had learned, but faster and more brutally. Alan's team struck on the first night. They didn't attack the main garrison. They hit the supply depot 3 kilometers outside the colony. The explosion was visible from orbit. When Zelthari quick reaction forces arrived, they found burning supplies and no enemies. Just a single phrase, spray-painted in Zelthari on the intact wall. You can't occupy what you can't supply. Dexval ordered increased security on all logistics operations. He assigned triple guards to every supply route. He demanded aerial reconnaissance before any convoy moved. Everything by the book. Everything following proper military doctrine. It didn't matter. Phantom Team's demolition expert, Sergeant Carlos Ruiz, had spent 2 weeks before the invasion mapping underground utility tunnels. The Zelthari sensors could detect movement on the surface, but the old mining tunnels ran everywhere beneath the colony. Carlos moved through them like a ghost, placing charges with precise timing. The Zelthari discovered their communications were compromised when orders began getting mixed up. Units received contradictory instructions. Supply convoys arrived at empty checkpoints. Patrols found themselves in the wrong sectors. It took 3 days for Thexval to realize someone was inside his network, altering data in real time. Corporal Nina Foster handled Phantom Team's electronic warfare. She had hacked the Zelthari systems within hours of their landing. Their encryption was sophisticated, but it was designed to prevent other aliens from accessing it. Nina had human software, which approached the problem from angles the Zelthari had never considered. She didn't just intercept their communications. She altered them. The psychological pressure built slowly. Zelthari soldiers started reporting strange occurrences. Equipment that worked perfectly would malfunction at critical moments. Lights would cut out during patrol changes. Their own vehicles would lock them out of the control systems. Nothing that caused casualties, but everything that created doubt. Thexval interviewed his troops and heard the same stories. Humans appearing at impossible distances, making shots that shouldn't be possible, attacks that came from directions that surveillance showed as clear. Equipment failures that investigation proved were deliberate sabotage. Yet no one could explain how the saboteurs got past multiple security checkpoints. One Zelthari squad leader described an encounter that haunted him. His unit had been patrolling a warehouse district when they spotted a single human on a rooftop. They fired plasma weapons that should have vaporized the target. The human disappeared. 2 seconds later, explosives detonated on 3 sides of the squad's position. The Zelthari scattered, called for support, and found themselves herded into a kill zone they hadn't known existed. Tranquilizer darts dropped them one by one. They woke up 6 hours later in an alley, alive but stripped of all weapons and equipment. After 4 weeks, Thexval withdrew. He had lost 6,000 troops to casualties, capture, or simple desertion. His report to High Command was longer and more detailed than Vex-Thor's. He included tactical analysis, intercepted human communications, and psychological profiles of his affected soldiers. His conclusion was stark. Human special forces operated on principles that Zelthari military doctrine had no answer for. High Command began to notice a pattern. Across 12 different worlds, Zelthari forces were encountering human resistance that didn't match any known military model. The humans didn't fight to hold territory. They fought to make occupation impossible. They turned superior technology into a liability by attacking supply lines, communications, and morale, rather than engaging in direct combat. A mid-level intelligence officer named Krothos compiled every report into a single classified document. He called it The Human Paradox. The title referred to a simple observation. Human regular military forces could be defeated through conventional superiority. Human special operations forces could not be defeated because they refused to fight conventionally. Krothos identified key characteristics. Human special forces trained for years in survival, improvisation, and operating without support. They studied the enemy's psychology and exploited it ruthlessly. They used the environment as a weapon. Most importantly, They had no ego invested in how they won. Victory was the only goal. And any method that achieved victory was acceptable. The document circulated among senior Zelthari commanders. Most rejected its conclusions. A few began quietly altering their invasion plans to avoid human-occupied worlds entirely. On Earth, in a nondescript military facility, Jake Morrison stood before a holographic display showing Zelthari fleet movements. A dozen red icons marked alien ships moving toward various human colonies. Blue icons marked special forces teams already in position or deploying to meet them. General Patricia Wells stood beside him, studying the same display. She commanded all human special operations forces, a position that gave her authority over units most governments didn't officially acknowledge existed. "What do you think?" she asked Jake. "Can we hold?" Jake studied the display carefully. "We're not trying to hold. We're trying to make them quit trying to take." "There's a difference." Patricia nodded. "The Zelthari keep sending larger forces. Eventually, they'll send something we can't stop. Then we make the cost too high to matter." Jake pointed to a cluster of red icons. "They're learning. But they're learning the wrong lessons. They think we're using new technology. They don't understand we're using old psychology." The general raised an eyebrow. "Explain. Everything we do, humans did to each other for thousands of years. Guerrilla warfare. Psychological operations. Asymmetric tactics. We didn't invent this to fight aliens. We invented it to fight ourselves. The Zelthari have conquered 47 species. None of them fought the way we fight, because none of them had our history." Patricia considered this. "So we're not special. We're just experienced at being terrible to each other." Jake smiled without humor. "That's one way to put it. Another way is that we've spent millennia learning how to beat superior opponents. Every human who ever fought against occupation, every resistance movement, every insurgency that our ancestors survived or crushed, taught us lessons. The Zelthari have technology. We have experience." The display updated with new information. Another Zelthari fleet heading toward Kepler Station. Patricia studied the numbers and frowned. "That's a big one. 15,000 troops." Jake calculated quickly. Kepler Station had 80,000 civilians and no time to evacuate. The fleet couldn't arrive in time. That left special forces. He looked at the available Kepler Station, hung in the darkness like a spinning wheel of light. The station served as a strategic hub for human trade routes, with 80,000 civilians living in its interconnected modules. It was also completely defenseless against a military invasion. The nearest human fleet was 3 weeks away. Ghost Unit had 48 hours. Jake Morrison studied the station schematics on his portable display. Beside him, Lisa Chen checked her equipment for the third time. Danny Price monitored Zelthari communications through his modified headset. The two newer members of the team, Specialist Amy Clark and Corporal Nick Santos, prepared their gear in professional silence. 5 people to defend a city in space. "We're not defending it," Jake reminded them during the briefing. "We're making the Zelthari wish they'd never heard of it." "There's a difference." Amy looked up from her linguistic database. She was 26, the youngest on the team. With a gift for languages that bordered on supernatural, she had learned Zelthari in 3 months and could speak 6 other alien dialects. "I've prepared the psychological warfare broadcasts. The Zelthari have a strong cultural connection to their family units. Threatening that connection should create significant stress." Nick, a lean man with a sniper's patient eyes, marked positions on the station map. "I've identified 12 optimal overwatch positions. If we control these points, we can observe 70% of the station's main corridors." Danny adjusted his equipment. "I can access the station's environmental controls from any terminal. Life support, gravity, lighting, all of it runs through systems I can manipulate. The Zelthari won't know whether they're fighting us or the station itself." Lisa smiled grimly. "I've got enough materials to make 300 improvised devices. Not military grade, but the Zelthari scanners won't recognize them as threats. By the time they figure out what they're looking at, it'll be too late. Jake listened to his team and felt the familiar weight of responsibility. These people trusted him to get them home alive. That meant making hard choices and accepting ugly realities. They weren't heroes. They were professionals doing an impossible job. The team inserted onto Kepler Station through a maintenance airlock. The station administrator, a man named George Palmer, met them in secret. He was sweating despite the cool temperature. "The civilians don't know you're here," George said. "If they panic, the Zelthari will use it as an excuse for violence." "They won't know we're here," Jake assured him. "No one will. That's the point." For 2 days, Ghost Unit prepared the battlefield. Lisa placed her improvised devices in locations that appeared random but followed a precise pattern. Each explosive was small enough to avoid detection, but powerful enough to disable critical infrastructure. She wired them to Danny's control system, turning the entire station into a network of controlled chaos. Danny infiltrated every electronic system on the station. The Zelthari would arrive expecting to seize control of computers, sensors, and life support. They would find those systems already compromised, responding to commands they never gave. Amy recorded dozens of audio files in perfect Zelthari. Some were warnings, some were threats, some were subtle psychological attacks designed to create paranoia and doubt. She loaded them into the station's communication system, ready to broadcast on channels the Zelthari would consider secure. Nick positioned equipment at each of his 12 overwatch points. He couldn't be in 12 places at once, but he could move between them quickly. More importantly, he could make the Zelthari think there were snipers everywhere. Jake coordinated everything and tried not to think about the odds. 15,000 troops against 5 operators. It wasn't a fight they could win through conventional means, so they wouldn't fight conventionally. The Zelthari fleet arrived exactly on schedule. General Thexval commanded the invasion force. He had learned from his previous failure. This time, he brought overwhelming numbers and strict protocols. His troops would secure the station in 4 stages, following procedures designed to prevent the kind of guerrilla resistance that had plagued other operations. The first troops landed in Docking Bay 7. 1,000 soldiers in full combat gear, weapons ready, shields active. They deployed according to the plan, establishing secure positions and advancing in coordinated units. The lights went out, not all of them. Just enough to create pockets of darkness between illuminated areas. The Zelthari switched to night vision, compensating quickly, but the darkness created doubt. What waited in those shadows? A voice spoke in Zelthari over their communication channel. The voice was female, young, and perfectly articulated. "Welcome to Kepler Station. You should not have come here." The transmission ended before they could trace it. Thexval, monitoring from his command ship, ordered his troops to ignore psychological warfare and proceed with the occupation. The first wave pushed deeper into the station. They encountered no resistance. Civilians had been evacuated to safe zones. The corridors were empty. Then the gravity failed in Section 4. 300 Zelthari soldiers found themselves floating helplessly, disoriented and unable to maintain formation. The gravity returned after 30 seconds, slamming them back to the deck. No permanent damage, but the message was clear. The station itself was hostile. Lisa triggered her first device as the second wave landed. A small explosion disabled the main power relay to Docking Bay 9. The Zelthari in that sector found themselves cut off from their command ship. Communication dead, emergency lighting barely functional. They were not injured, but they were isolated. Nick fired his first shot from Overwatch Position 3. A single bullet struck the command console in the Forward Operations Center, destroying it without harming any soldiers. The Zelthari responded with overwhelming fire, shredding the position with plasma weapons. By the time they advanced to investigate, Nick was already at Overwatch Position 7, 300 meters away. The Zelthari discovered something disturbing. The humans weren't defending the station. They were haunting it. Patrols reported movement that disappeared when investigated. Soldiers heard footsteps behind them, turned, and found empty corridors. Equipment malfunctioned in ways that suggested sabotage, yet security footage showed no one approaching. The station's automated systems seemed to be actively working against them. Amy's broadcasts played at irregular intervals on channels the Zelthari believed were secure. Sometimes the messages were warnings. Your families will be told you died bravely. That will be a lie. You died confused and afraid, fighting enemies you never saw. Sometimes they were simple statements of fact. We know your position. We know your strength. We know you're afraid. After 12 hours, Thexval realized his troops were making no progress. They had secured less than 20% of the station. His soldiers were demoralized, jumping at shadows, firing at phantoms. Worse, they were starting to refuse orders. Units that were supposed to advance instead fortified their current positions, afraid to move into unknown territory. Jake watched from the shadows as a Zelthari unit set up a defensive perimeter in a cargo bay. They were scared. Good. Scared enemies made mistakes. He triggered a device Lisa had placed 3 days earlier. A small explosive disabled the lighting in the bay, plunging it into darkness for 5 seconds before the emergency systems activated. No one was hurt, but the Zelthari abandoned the position, falling back to a more secure location. The pattern continued for 6 days. The Zelthari would advance. Something would go wrong. They would fall back. Sometimes it was explosions. Sometimes it was system failures. Sometimes it was just a broadcast telling them they were being watched. The humans remained invisible, striking from nowhere, vanishing completely. On the 6th day, the human fleet arrived. Thexval faced a choice. He could continue the ground operation, trying to secure a station his troops were terrified of, or he could withdraw and engage the fleet. He chose withdrawal. The cost of taking Kepler Station was too high, and his troops were on the verge of mutiny. As the Zelthari ships pulled away, Jake and his team emerged from hiding. They had lost Nick in a firefight while covering civilian evacuation from Sector 12. The victory celebration across human space meant nothing to Ghost Unit. They had done their job, but it had cost them a friend. Lisa found Jake sitting alone in an observation room, watching the stars. You okay? Jake didn't answer immediately. We won. The Zelthari High Command met in a chamber designed to project power. Holographic displays showed the Empire's territory, a spreading network of conquered systems that represented centuries of military success. Today, that display included a new element. Red markers indicated human-controlled space. More disturbing were the orange markers, showing Zelthari defeats. There were too many orange markers. Intelligence Officer Krathos stood before the council, presenting his analysis. His skin showed patterns of stress that other Zelthari recognized immediately. This was not a briefing he wanted to give. We have engaged human forces on 23 separate occasions, he began. His voice carried the clicking undertones of his species' natural speech. Regular human military units have proven beatable through conventional superiority. We have won 4 fleet engagements and 2 ground battles against their organized armies. The council members shifted, waiting for the other shoe to drop. However, Krathos continued, we have encountered human special operations forces on 18 occasions. We have won 0 engagements against these units. Total casualties exceed 43,000 troops. More concerning is the psychological damage. Soldiers who survive encounters with human special forces refuse deployment to human territories. Some have deserted rather than face these enemies again. One council member, a general named Vex Thor, who had suffered the first defeat at New Terra, spoke up. They don't fight. They ambush. They use tactics that violate every principle of honorable warfare. Krathos displayed footage captured by Zelthari troops. The images showed brief glimpses of humans appearing and vanishing, explosions that came from unexpected angles, and the aftermath of attacks where no enemy bodies were found. Honor is irrelevant. Victory is what matters, and they achieve victory consistently. The council debated for hours. Some argued for developing similar units. Kratos explained why that wouldn't work. Human special operations culture had evolved over centuries, rooted in a species that had spent millennia fighting itself. The tactics weren't new. The psychology wasn't revolutionary. What made human special forces effective was accumulated experience from thousands of conflicts. "You're saying we can't beat them?" another council member demanded. "I'm saying we can't beat them the way we fight wars." Kratos displayed his full analysis. Human special forces train specifically to defeat technologically superior opponents. They study enemy psychology and exploit weaknesses. They use improvisation and adaptation as weapons. Most importantly, they separate emotion from combat. They don't fight for glory or honor. They fight to win, using whatever methods achieve victory. The council adjourned without reaching a conclusion. The Zelthari Empire had never faced an enemy like this. Every other species they had conquered fought in ways that Zelthari doctrine could counter. The humans were different, and that difference was costing them everything. News of the Zelthari struggles reached the Galactic Council, a coalition of 17 species that maintained an uneasy peace with the Zelthari Empire. In a conference chamber orbiting neutral space, ambassadors from across the galaxy discussed the situation. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez represented humanity. She was a diplomat, not a soldier, but she understood military matters well enough to explain them. The assembled aliens listened as she described human special operations doctrine. "Your soldiers ambush from hiding," one ambassador said with clear distaste. "You use deception and terror. How is this different from simple criminality?" Elena kept her expression neutral. "We fight to win. Our special forces train for years in survival, improvisation, and operating without support. They understand that warfare isn't about fairness. It's about achieving objectives with minimum casualties to our own people." "But you hide," another alien insisted. "You refuse direct combat. Where is the honor in that? Honor doesn't protect civilians." Elena pulled up footage of Kepler Station. 5 of our operators held that station against 15,000 Zelthari troops for 6 days. They saved 80,000 civilian lives. They did it by being smart, not by being fair. If your definition of honor requires us to let civilians die, then we'll stay dishonorable. The alien ambassadors struggled with this concept. Their military traditions emphasized direct confrontation, technological superiority, and honorable combat. The idea of deliberately avoiding fair fights struck them as cowardly. Yet they couldn't deny the effectiveness of human methods. In a private chamber, Elena met with Kratos. The Zelthari intelligence officer had requested the meeting through back channels. He wanted to understand the enemy that was destroying his empire's military reputation. "How did your species develop such methods?" Kratos asked directly. "What in your evolution created warriors who fight without honor?" Elena considered how to answer. "We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. Every trick, every tactic, every psychological operation was learned fighting ourselves. When you face us, you're not fighting one nation or one army. You're fighting the accumulated knowledge of every conflict in human history." She pulled up historical footage. Ancient humans conducting guerrilla warfare, medieval resistances against occupying armies, modern insurgencies that defeated technologically superior forces. All of it led to current doctrine. "We didn't develop special operations to fight aliens," Elena explained. "We developed them to fight each other. Every method you've encountered, humans used on humans first. The ambushes, the psychological warfare, the improvised explosives. All of it comes from conflicts where survival required outsmarting and outfighting enemies who were stronger, better equipped, and more numerous." Kratos studied the footage with growing unease. "You learned to fight superior forces by being the inferior force." "Exactly." Elena's expression was grim. "We've been the underdog so often that we got very good at it. Your empire has conquered 47 species through technological superiority. You've never had to learn how to win when you're weaker. We've never stopped learning that lesson. The meeting ended with Krothos more disturbed than when it began. He returned to Zelthari space and wrote a new report. This one was titled simply, Why We Cannot Win. Meanwhile, on a distant world called Frontier's Edge, another situation was developing. The Draconians, a warrior species known for their emphasis on personal combat and honor, had been watching the human Zelthari conflict with interest. They prided themselves on being the galaxy's finest soldiers. Their champion, war leader Zarkoth, found the reports of human special forces insulting. Tactics without honor are not tactics, he declared to his war council. They are cowardice dressed as strategy. I will prove that true warriors can defeat these human shadows. The Draconian High Council approved his request to test human forces personally. Zarkoth assembled 2,000 of his finest warriors. They were equipped with traditional draconian weapons, blades and firearms designed for honorable combat. They were the best fighters their species could produce. Zarkoth chose Frontier's Edge because intelligence reports suggested minimal human military presence. He expected to face the special forces everyone feared. He intended to defeat them through superior skill and honorable combat, restoring proper military values to a galaxy that seemed to be losing them. Jake Morrison received new orders while Ghost Unit was recovering from Kepler Station. Hold Frontier's Edge with available forces. The fleet couldn't provide support. Regular military units were deployed elsewhere. That left Special Operations. Jake's team now included a new member. Master Sergeant Pete Hammond was 52 years old and had been in Special Forces for 30 years. He had fought in every major human conflict and seen things that kept him awake at night. He brought experience that Jake's younger operators needed. Pete studied the intelligence on the Draken War leader Zarkoth, stood at the viewport of his command ship, watching Frontier's Edge grow larger as they approached. The planet was unremarkable. A human colony with basic infrastructure and a population of 30,000. Intelligence suggested minimal military presence. Perfect for his purposes. Behind him, 2,000 draconian warriors prepared for deployment. Each one was a master of combat, trained from childhood in the warrior traditions that had made their species legendary. They carried plasma blades that could cut through armor and projectile weapons, designed for precision and power. More importantly, they carried pride. They were about to teach humans what real warriors looked like. Zarkoth had studied the reports of human special forces with contempt. Ambushes from hiding. Psychological attacks. Refusal to engage in direct combat. These were not the actions of warriors. They were the desperate tactics of cowards who knew they couldn't win a fair fight. His Draconians would force the humans into open battle and end this myth of Special Forces superiority. The landing was theatrical, which was intentional. Draconian culture valued displays of strength. The ships descended in perfect formation. Warriors disembarked in precise ranks. Zarkoth himself led from the front, his armor gleaming in the morning sun. They marched toward the human colony with weapons ready but not raised. Let the humans see what real military discipline looked like. What Zarkoth didn't know was that Jake Morrison had been on Frontier's Edge for 3 weeks, preparing. Jake watched the Draconian landing from a concealed position 5 kilometers away. Beside him, Pete Hammond studied the alien formation through binoculars and grunted. They're good. Real. Professional. Shame we're not going to fight them professionally. Lisa Chen was 50 meters to their left, invisible in the terrain. Danny Price monitored communications from a hidden bunker 2 kilometers behind them. The rest of Ghost Unit was spread across the canyon that Zarkoth's warriors were marching toward. 13 humans against 2,000 aliens. The odds were terrible. That's why Jake had chosen this ground. The canyon was 3 kilometers long and 200 meters wide. Rocky walls rose on both sides, limiting movement. There was a clear path through it, which was why the Draconians would choose this route. It was the fastest way to the colony. What they wouldn't realize until too late was that the entire canyon was a carefully prepared kill zone. Lisa had spent 2 weeks planting her devices. They were invisible to Draconian scanners, which were designed to detect sophisticated military explosives. Lisa used simple compounds, the kind that human insurgents had been making for centuries. Fertilizer bombs, fuel-air explosives, charges that would trigger avalanches from the unstable cliff faces. Nothing fancy, nothing that required advanced technology, just basic chemistry and patience. Danny had hacked every piece of technology within 10 kilometers. The Draconians relied on communication systems, tactical displays, and coordination software. All of it was now compromised. Danny could alter their orders, disable their equipment, or simply flood their channels with noise. At critical moments, Amy Clark had prepared psychological warfare broadcasts in the Draconian language. She had studied their culture and identified pressure points. Draconians valued honor above everything. Their worst fear was dying without glory, being remembered as failures. Amy's broadcasts would target that fear. The sniper teams had positioned themselves at 12 points along the canyon walls. They weren't planning to kill Draconians. They were planning to control the battlefield, forcing the enemy to move in predictable ways. Jake checked his watch. The Draconians would enter the canyon in 10 minutes. He activated his communication system. All units, prepare for initial contact. Remember, we're not trying to kill them all. We're trying to break their will. Zarkoth led his warriors into the canyon without hesitation. His scouts had cleared the route. His sensors showed no enemy presence. The canyon was empty. He ordered his forces to proceed in combat formation, ready for anything but expecting nothing. The first explosion came from the canyon floor, 50 meters ahead of the main column. It wasn't large enough to cause casualties. It was just loud enough to stop the advance and create chaos. The Draconians reacted exactly as trained, forming defensive positions and sweeping the area for threats. They found nothing. A voice spoke in perfect Draconian over their communication channels. "Welcome to our territory. You should not have come." The transmission ended before they could trace it. Zarkoth ordered his troops to ignore the psychological warfare and continue advancing. They moved forward cautiously, weapons ready. The second explosion triggered an avalanche from the eastern cliff face. Tons of rock crashed down. Not on the Draconians, but behind them, blocking their retreat route. Still, no casualties. But now, they were committed to moving forward. The pattern continued for the next hour. Small explosions that created obstacles. Sniper shots that missed deliberately, forcing the Draconians to take cover. Communication interference that made coordination difficult. Nothing that caused real damage, but everything that created stress and confusion. Zarkoth realized slowly that he wasn't fighting an enemy. He was being herded. Every explosion pushed his forces in a specific direction. Every attack channeled them into predetermined paths. The humans weren't trying to win a battle. They were controlling the battlefield itself. He tried to break the pattern by ordering units to scale the canyon walls and attack from elevation. Lisa triggered charges that destabilized the cliff face those units were climbing, forcing them to retreat. He attempted to call for air support. Danny jammed the communications. He ordered his warriors to rush forward at maximum speed. The sniper teams dropped precision shots that disabled their officers and communication specialists, creating chaos in the ranks. By the time Zarkoth's forces reached the end of the canyon, they had suffered 300 casualties, none from direct combat, all from carefully orchestrated chaos that turned their own strength against them. His warriors were demoralized, confused, and afraid. They had never faced an enemy like this. Then they saw the humans. 13 figures stood in the open, weapons lowered. Jake Morrison stood in front, his expression neutral. Behind him, Ghost Unit waited. They looked like ordinary soldiers. There was nothing impressive about them. No advanced armor. No exotic weapons. Just people who looked like they belonged anywhere except a battlefield. Zarkoth felt rage replace his confusion. Finally, an honorable fight. He ordered his remaining 1,700 warriors to advance and crush these humans who dared face them openly. Jake activated his communication system. Now, Lisa. The canyon exploded. Lisa had saved her largest devices for this moment. Massive charges detonated along both cliff faces, triggering cascading avalanches. The Draconians found themselves trapped in a corridor of falling rock with no cover and no escape. The explosions didn't target them directly. They blocked exit routes, created obstacles, and funneled the surviving warriors into an increasingly small area. Amy's broadcasts began playing on every Draconian communication channel. Your leaders have led you into a trap. You will die here, without glory. Your families will know you failed. This is not honorable combat. This is slaughter. The sniper teams opened fire, not killing but wounding. A warrior shot in the leg, couldn't advance, but required 2 others to carry him. The Draconians tried to return fire, but they couldn't find targets. The humans remained invisible, striking from positions that seemed impossible. Zarkoth watched his perfect military force disintegrate into chaos. His warriors were panicking, abandoning positions, breaking formation. Everything his culture valued was falling apart because these humans refused to fight the right way. Then Jake's voice cut through the chaos, speaking in flawless Draconian through every communication channel. You have lost. You can withdraw with your wounded and your honor, or you can die here for nothing. Choose now. It was the offer of mercy that broke Zarkoth completely. He had come to prove Draconian superiority. Instead, he was being offered a chance to survive by an enemy he had called cowards. The shame was overwhelming. But the alternative was watching his warriors die for his pride. He ordered the retreat. Ghost Unit didn't pursue. They watched as the Draconians carried their wounded back through the canyon, moving carefully around the traps that remained. 1,200 warriors had died, or been wounded. The survivors would carry the story back to their homeworld. The report that war leader Zarkoth submitted to the Draconian High Council was unlike anything their military archives had ever contained. It was not a story of glorious combat or honorable defeat. It was a clinical analysis of how 2,000 elite warriors had been systematically dismantled by 13 humans who refused to fight fairly. Zarkoth titled his report, "Why We Cannot Fight Them." The title alone caused controversy in a warrior culture that believed any enemy could be defeated through superior skill and courage. But the details were impossible to dismiss. Zarkoth had lost 1,200 warriors without engaging in a single direct combat exchange. The humans had controlled every aspect of the battlefield, turned Draconian strengths into weaknesses, and offered mercy when they could have finished the slaughter. The report spread through back channels to other species. Military commanders across the galaxy read it with growing concern. The Zelthari had lost 60,000 troops to human special forces. The Draconians had suffered their worst defeat in recorded history. A pattern was emerging that no one wanted to acknowledge. Humanity had mastered a form of warfare that rendered traditional military superiority irrelevant. In a secure chamber aboard a diplomatic station, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The topic was officially listed as Human Military Capabilities Assessment. Everyone knew what they were really discussing. How do we avoid becoming the next species humiliated by human special forces? Ambassador Elena Rodriguez sat across from representatives of 17 alien species. Their expressions ranged from hostile to fearful. She knew what they wanted to hear. That humans would fight fairly. That they would respect the established rules of warfare. That they would behave like civilized species. She wasn't going to give them that comfort. Your concerns are noted, Elena began, addressing the council formally. Humanity has no intention of changing our special operations doctrine. We developed these methods over centuries of hard experience. They work. They keep our people alive. We will continue using them. An ambassador from the correlation, a hive mind species that valued logical efficiency above all else, spoke up. Your methods create instability. Warfare should be predictable, conducted according to established protocols that minimize chaos. Elena met the alien's compound eyes without flinching. War is chaos. Trying to make it predictable just means you're not prepared for enemies who understand that. Our special forces embrace chaos, because chaos favors the prepared over the powerful. The Zelthari representative, a different officer than Krathos but carrying the same defeated air, asked the question everyone was thinking. What would it take for humanity to teach these methods to other species? Elena considered her answer carefully. Years of training. A complete restructuring of your military philosophy. The willingness to abandon honor, pride, and every cultural value that makes you fight fairly. She paused. Most species can't do it. They're psychologically incapable of separating emotion from combat. They need to believe they're the good guys, fighting the right way. And humans don't need that? The Zelthari asked. Humans know we're not the good guys. Elena's voice was flat. We've been the bad guys too often in our own history to have illusions about it. Our special forces don't fight for glory or honor. They fight to complete missions using whatever methods work. If that means hiding in the shadows and attacking from ambush, fine. If that means psychological warfare that breaks enemy morale, fine. If that means offering mercy to enemies we've defeated, also fine. Whatever achieves the objective. The council chamber fell silent. The aliens were beginning to understand something fundamental about humanity. Every other species in the galaxy had developed warfare as an extension of their cultural values. Humans had developed warfare as a practical problem, requiring practical solutions. In a private meeting after the council session, Elena sat with Krathos. The Zelthari intelligence officer had become something of a friend, united by their shared understanding of military realities that their respective leaders didn't want to face. My superiors want to develop special forces units like yours, Krathos admitted. They believe it's just a matter of training and doctrine. Elena shook her head. It won't work. Your species has conquered 47 systems using conventional superiority. You've never had to learn how to win when you're weaker. Transcends. End quote. Our special forces exist because humans have spent thousands of years being the underdog. She pulled up historical footage on her display. Ancient humans conducting guerrilla warfare against empires. Medieval resistance movements, using terrain and local knowledge to defeat armored knights. Modern insurgencies that outlasted technologically superior occupying forces. Every conflict taught lessons that accumulated into current doctrine. This is what you're competing against, Elena explained. Not just our current training programs, but the entire history of human conflict. Every method we use, we learned by fighting ourselves. We know how to beat superior forces, because we've been doing it to each other since before we had written language. Krathos studied the footage with professional interest. Your species weaponized its own violent history. That's one way to look at it. Elena's expression was thoughtful. Another way is that we learned from our mistakes. Every defeat taught us something. Every victory showed us what worked. By the time we reached the stars, we had accumulated thousands of years of lessons about how to fight smarter instead of harder. Can this be taught? Krathos asked. Not the specific tactics, but the mindset. The willingness to abandon honor for effectiveness. Elena considered the question carefully. Maybe. But it requires accepting some ugly truths about warfare. It means admitting that fair fights are for sports, not survival. It means being willing to use every advantage, no matter how underhanded. Most importantly, it means separating your ego from combat outcomes. You have to not care about being seen as cowards or dishonorable. You have to care only about winning. The Zelthari was quiet for a long moment. That is why we cannot defeat you. Not because you're stronger, but because you're willing to be whatever you need to be. On Earth, in a facility that didn't officially exist, Jake Morrison briefed a new class of Special Forces candidates. The room held 30 men and women who had volunteered for the hardest training in human military. Most would fail. The few who succeeded would join units that operated in shadows, conducting missions the public would never hear about. Jake stood before them, looking every bit the ordinary soldier he was designed to appear. No impressive decorations, no intimidating presence, just a man who had survived impossible situations through preparation and adaptability. "You're here because you want to be Special Forces operators," Jake began. "Let me tell you what that actually means. It means spending years learning skills you hope you'll never need. It means operating alone behind enemy lines with no support. It means making choices that will haunt you forever, because someone has to make those choices, and you're the one there." He paused, studying the faces before him. "The aliens think we're shadows that fight without honor. They're right. We do fight without honor, because honor gets people killed. We fight to win using whatever methods work. If that means ambushing enemies from hiding, we do it. If that means psychological warfare that breaks their spirit before we break their bodies, we do it. If that means looking like cowards to everyone watching, we do it." Some of the candidates looked uncomfortable. Good. Jake wanted them uncomfortable. This job wasn't for people who needed to feel heroic. The Zelthari lost 60,000 troops to Special Forces operations. The Draconians lost 1,200 warriors to a single team. Those victories didn't happen because we're better fighters. They happened because we understand something our enemies don't. Warfare isn't about courage or strength or technology. It's about making the enemy quit. Sometimes that means killing them. More often it means making them too scared or confused or demoralized to continue fighting. Jake activated a display showing footage from various operations. Ghost unit ambushing a Zelthari patrol. Phantom team sabotaging enemy equipment. Delta Squad conducting psychological operations that broke an enemy garrison without firing a shot. Watch these operations carefully. Notice what we're not doing. We're not engaging in fair fights. We're not exposing ourselves unnecessarily. We're not trying to prove we're tough. We're completing objectives using the most efficient methods available. That's what special operations means. Efficiency over ego. The briefing continued for 3 hours. Jake covered doctrine, tactics, and the psychological realities of unconventional warfare. He didn't try to make it sound glorious. Glory was for regular military units that fought pitched battles. Special forces operated in the dark spaces where glory didn't exist. After the briefing, Pete Hammond found Jake in the observation room, overlooking the training grounds. The older operator handed Jake a cup of coffee and watched the candidates begin their first exercise. "You scared half of them," Pete observed. "Good. If they're scared now, they might survive when it matters." The 2 operators stood in silence, watching young men and women begin the journey that might make them into shadows that fought without honor. Below them, candidates struggled through obstacle courses, hand-to-hand combat drills, and tactical problems that had no clean solutions. "Do you think the aliens will ever understand?" Pete asked. "Why we fight the way we do?" Jake considered the question. "Some of them already understand. Krathos gets it. Zarkoth learned the hard way. But understanding and accepting are different things. Their cultures value honor and glory. Ours values survival and victory. That gap is too wide for most of them to cross." Pete nodded. "So we keep being the bad guys who win. That's the job." Jake's voice carried no regret, no pride, just acceptance of reality. Someone has to be willing to fight dirty. Someone has to be ready to do what needs doing when the rules don't work. That's us. It's always been us. In space, the galaxy adjusted to a new reality. Human special forces had proven that technological superiority and numerical advantage meant nothing against enemies who refused to fight conventionally. Military academies across dozens of worlds added new courses on asymmetric warfare and psychological operations. Generals updated their tactical doctrines to account for enemies who might not play by established rules. The Galactic Council established new protocols for military engagement. Section 7. Subsection 12 included a standing recommendation. Avoid deployment of ground forces to human-controlled territories unless absolutely necessary. If engagement becomes unavoidable, assume conventional tactics will prove ineffective. Prepare for extended psychological warfare and unconventional resistance. It wasn't a formal surrender, but it might as well have been. The galaxy's military powers had acknowledged what they couldn't defeat. Not human technology or numbers or courage, but human willingness to fight without honor, to embrace chaos, and to do whatever it took to win. In a bar near the Special Forces training facility, Jake and his team gathered for Nick Santos's memorial service. It was a small affair, just Ghost Unit and a few other operators who had worked with Nick. No speeches, no formal ceremony, just people who understood the cost of the work they did. Lisa raised her glass. To Nick. He died, making sure 300 civilians got out alive. The team drank in silence. Outside, the galaxy continued turning. Somewhere, another Special Forces team was deploying to another impossible mission. Somewhere, alien generals were updating their doctrines to account for enemies who fought like humans. Somewhere, the next generation of operators was learning the hard lessons that might keep them alive. The war continued. It always did. But now the galaxy knew a truth that humans had learned centuries ago. Superior technology didn't guarantee victory. Neither did numerical advantage or cultural values of honor. Victory went to whoever was willing to do whatever it took. And humans, with their long history of fighting themselves, had become very good at being willing. Jake finished his drink and looked at his team. Tomorrow they would train. Next week they would deploy. Next month they might be holding another memorial service. That was the reality of special operations. But tonight, they remembered a friend who had done his job and paid the price. That was enough. It had to be. Pete Hammond stood beside Jake, watching the aliens retreat. That was brutal. Jake's expression didn't change. That was necessary. They needed to understand what they're facing. Do you think they'll learn? Pete shrugged. Some will. Some won't. But every alien general who hears this story will think twice before engaging human special forces. The team remained on Frontier's edge for another week, helping with recovery operations. Zarkoth's retreat had been broadcast across Draconian space. The warrior culture that valued honor above all had watched their champion accept mercy from an enemy he had called cowards. The story spread beyond the Draconians. The Galactic Council received reports. The Zelthari High Command updated their military doctrines. Across known space, alien military leaders began adding a new section to their operational planning. Avoid engagement with human special operations forces whenever possible. Ian's shook his head. They think honor matters in war. That makes them predictable. Can we use that? Jake asked. Pete smiled. Honor is just another weakness to exploit. They'll expect us to fight like them. When we don't, they'll get angry. Angry enemies make mistakes. The team began planning. They had 13 operators against 2,000 Draconian warriors. The odds were bad, but Ghost Unit had faced bad odds before. They had something the Draconians didn't. They had no illusions about fairness, no commitment to honorable combat, and no hesitation about using every advantage they could find. The Draconians were coming to Frontier's edge, expecting a fight. Ghost Unit would give them one. Just not the fight they expected. That's not what I asked. Nick's family is going to get a folded flag and a story about how he died bravely. They won't know he spent his last minutes covering the retreat of 300 civilians he'd never met. They won't know he killed 12 enemies and saved thousands of lives. Lisa sat beside him. They'll know he mattered. That's enough. Jake hoped she was right. In space, the war continued. On dozens of worlds, Special Forces teams fought impossible battles against overwhelming odds. Some won. Some lost. All of them paid the price for victory in ways the public would never understand. That was the job. That was what they had signed up for. But knowing that didn't make it easier. Sets. 5 operators. Himself, Lisa, Danny, and 2 newer team members. 5 against 15,000. We can work with that, Jake said. Patricia looked at him carefully. I'm not ordering this. That's not a fair fight. Jake's expression didn't change. Fair fights are for sports. This is war. We'll make it work. The general authorized the deployment. As Jake prepared his team for insertion, he thought about what he had told Patricia. Humans weren't special. They were just experienced at fighting dirty. Sometimes that made all the difference. Glimpses that vanished when investigated. Morale collapsed as troops refused to leave their fortified positions. The worst part was the psychological warfare. Every morning, Zelthari soldiers woke to find messages spray-painted on their defenses. We know where you sleep. We know how many bullets you have. We're watching you right now. The messages were never threats of violence, just statements of fact. Somehow, that made them more terrifying. After losing 4,000 troops without a single confirmed enemy contact, Vexthor made the hardest decision of his military career. He ordered a complete withdrawal from New Terra. As his ships broke orbit, he composed his report to High Command. The words felt wrong as he recorded them, but they were true. Humans possessed capabilities that defied conventional military analysis. They fought without honor, without exposing themselves, without giving their enemy anything to target. Jake watched the Zelthari fleet depart and felt no satisfaction. They had won this battle, but he knew it was only the beginning. The aliens would be back, probably with new tactics and better preparation. Ghost Unit would be ready. They always were.